Okay, so we'll make a start. So thanks everyone for joining us for our webinar. So moving goods cross-border. So particularly focusing on bringing goods into the UK. Before we start, I'm just going to introduce myself. So my name is Dom, for those people that don't know me on the call. I'm going to be the host today, and I'm joined with Håkan and Louis. Before we start, I'm just going to cover some ground rules of the Zoom call and the webinar. So the recording is going to be sent around to everyone after. So you'll get that and you'll get copies of the slides. Cameras and microphones will be off, but there will be time to ask questions at the end. So there'll be a Q&A function. So that's at the bottom of this call on a toolbar. So please do ask questions on that throughout when it pops up. And then I will present those back at the end. Okay. So Nancy's moved the slides on there. So again, a bit about me. So I'm a qualified accountant, head of finance at Goodwill. I look after the team that deliver our finance services to our clients. And Goodwill, for those that don't know on the call or sort of our prospective clients on the call, we've been for 26 years helping businesses enter the UK market. So we offer a full suite of back office services to those clients, covering HR, so employee support, payroll, company secretarial duties, and day-to-day finance tasks. So anything from the operational side of bookkeeping through to more the compliance side of things. And a recent partnership we've got is with Håkan and Louis' team at Evelyn Partners to really support our clients on customs. It's a complex area and something, a partnership we've already found very useful for our clients and hopefully adds some value. So on that note, I'll pass over to Håkan and Louis, and they'll talk you through some of the key points about moving goods across borders.
Thank you very much, Dom. And hello, everyone. Thanks for calling in. Oh, I have a little bit of an echo. Is it just me hearing the echo? I think it went away. I think we're good. Excellent. So really exciting to talk about imports into the UK and international trade. You are a mixed bunch of people from different industries. So what we'll do is that we're going to keep it relevant for any kind of products coming into the UK. But it also means, of course, that if you have specific questions about, for example, food imports, we might not be covering that to the level of detail that you would like. And in that case, feel free to reach out to Louis and myself through Dom or directly. Dom and us will work very, very closely together. So contact one of us and all three will get involved. You have our contact details there on the screen. And as Tom said, we'll send out the slides later. So you got that. Okay, without further ado, let's go to the next slide and just show what we're going to cover today. So you can see there's quite a lot of topics, a lot to go through in just half an hour, which we're going to make sure we leave time for Q&A at the end. So it's going to be a bit of a whistle, how do we say in English? A whistle-stop tour. And obviously, we can't go into too much detail on each of these topics, but we thought we don't want to exclude any of these topics because they're all really relevant and complex. So hopefully after today, even though you might not have answers to all your questions, you will have seen the complexity that is involved in bringing goods into the UK. Right, okay, next slide, please. I'm going to hand over to Louis, and then towards the end, I'll come back and talk a little bit about a couple of the last topics on the slide that we just had there. So over to you, Louis.
Excellent, thank you, Håkan. Just to set the scene quickly, Brexit has resulted in a dramatic increase in the amounts of customs declarations that are being lodged, as trade between the UK and EU is now treated as if it was a rest of world import previously. As a result of this, customs duty and import VAT are now key considerations for businesses moving goods between the EU and the UK. This has also naturally resulted in an increased level of revenue at stake for the government, and with HMRC noticeably increasing post-importation audits. Could I have the next slide, please? So this, owing to the nature of the way that customs duty is collected, typically via a third party completing the customs declaration, on behalf of the trader, customs duty is one of the most overpaid taxes, particularly if a business does not have robust control frameworks to manage their supply chain. This offers a combination of risks and opportunities. HMRC are able to retrospectively audit a business, as well as the business being able to go back 3 years after import to retrospectively reclaim any duty that they deem to have been overpaid in this time. The key things here are control and oversight of your supply chain. One of the most common pitfalls that we encounter is businesses assuming that their customs agent is acting completely as they expect, and that they manage the whole process in the background. Mistakes and compliance errors can not only result in incorrect payments of taxes, but also major disruptions to trade flows. We could have the next slide, please. So there are a number of factors that determine the customs duty that's paid. We've got, and we often refer to these as the 3 cornerstones of customs. So you've got, first of all, the customs classification, which is more commonly known as the tariff rate or the commodity code. And this determines the ad valorem duty rate of the product that you're importing. You've also got customs valuation, which ultimately determines the value that the duty should be paid on. And then the origin of the goods, which determines if there's an available preferential duty rate, commonly as a result of a free trade agreement. If any of these 3 factors are incorrect and result in a mispayment of duties, this is ultimately a non-compliance with UK legislation and will be treated as such by HMRC. If I could have the next slide, please. Yeah. So first of all, we're going to have a little look at classification. So the importance of the correct classification cannot be underestimated. However, companies often neglect the classification, which can result in a combination of significant increase in costs, as well as the wrong amount of duty being paid or an improper use of free trade agreements. We've got a quick example of a commodity code there down to the 10-digit import code that you use, and the really important factor to know there is the local classification number. This varies jurisdiction to jurisdiction, and this is the one that you really need to ensure is 100% you're sure of and is completely correct in order to determine the correct duty rate. A common pitfall that we often see is businesses assuming that the classification of products is the responsibility of the freight forwarder or of their supplier. The nature of the commodity code, as I've just briefly outlined there, is that they differ by jurisdiction. And this creates a huge risk. As well, there is an extent of harmonization. There are crucial differences, particularly with the duty rate that's paid. Businesses should ensure that they are fully confident of the 10-digit commodity code and have actionable processes and review documents to evidence to HMRC in the event of an audit. The classification is not always unambiguous, which can provide possibilities for duty savings by using competing tariff codes. As an example of the importance of classification, we have recently assisted an e-commerce business with a 6-figure reclaim as a result of a classification review, where the business had been declaring the commodity code provided by their supplier without reviewing, which attracted a higher duty rate than the code we deemed to be correct. And they were able to go back 3 years with our help to reclaim the difference between the correct duty rate and the one they'd originally declared. If I could have the next slide, please. Lovely. The next consideration to be made is the customs valuation. So the customs valuation is the means of valuing the imported goods and is determined mainly for the purposes of applying the ad valorem rates of customs duty. It constitutes the taxable basis for customs duties. In most cases, the customs value is determined by the price paid or payable for the goods when sold for export to the UK. However, this can become complicated when goods are moved cross-border without a sale or when there are a number of transactions in a goods flow. The value declared, as shown there in the simple diagram, needs to include all necessary additions to for the sale or for the movement of the goods, which can include, but not always limited to, freight costs, insurance costs, royalties, as well as any additional payments made to the seller for the purposes of the export. The customs valuation becomes increasingly important when the sale of goods occurs between 2 related parties, and this information is now required to be shown on the customs declaration and provides an easy target for an audit. If you purchase from a related party, you must be able to show that this is an arm's length transaction and that the price paid has not been influenced by the relationship with the seller. It is now also expected in this instance that an intercompany transfer pricing policy can be evidenced to show the arm's length nature of an intercompany transaction. I can have the next slide, please. Finally, the final sort of consideration to be made when determining the duty rate is the origin of the goods. And to put it as simply as possible, the rules of origin ultimately establish the nationality of the product imported. Again, a simple diagram there that shows sort of the breakdown of origins in a manufactured product, and this is where this process can become slightly more convoluted and complicated, and it's absolutely crucial to fully understand all the inputs in a manufactured product in order to arrive at the correct origin of the product. This can be as much of a benefit as it can be a risk, as there are a number of free trade agreements that the UK currently has with trading nations, and they often offer a 0% or reduced rate of import duty. So it's really important to essentially fully understand all of the inputs when manufacturing products, as just because you've purchased a product from a country that you have a free trade agreement with, it doesn't necessarily mean that you that is originating in that jurisdiction, and that you can prove the relevant rules of origin for the product imported. Thank you. I'm just going to pass over now to Håkan, who's going to go through some of the duty reliefs.
Great stuff. Thanks, Louis. Yeah, so duty reliefs, Louis talked a little bit about the free trade agreements and preferential duty rates. Duty reliefs is another way to make sure you optimize the duty payments. So in other words, that you're not paying more duty than you need to. And it's also concerning the import VAT. So in short, duty reliefs is really about improving cash flow and accomplishing savings. And they're different reliefs, and they're all there for different business scenarios, really. I won't go through all of them, but what is common is that you're delaying the tax point. So even if the goods are coming into the UK physically, they are not yet eligible, or not eligible, they're not yet subject to payments of import VAT and duty immediately. So there's a sort of a waiting room, you can view it as. And to give it a bit more kind of a come to life a little bit, let's go to the next slide, and we have an illustration there of a company that is using customs warehousing or inward processing relief. Now, there are two different reliefs. One is for storing and one is for processing, but the principle how they work is the same. So this example here, you have a UK company, a rather large company, they're importing clothing, and they are importing both from EU manufacturers and from Chinese manufacturers. They're using free trade agreement for the EU manufacturers that have determined that the goods are truly of EU origin. So 75% of what they import is already claimed preference for. So that's great. They've optimized that flow. But when it comes to the goods from China, there's no free trade agreement in place. So you will have duty on the goods coming in from China. Now, clothes have a 12% duty rate, which is fairly high. And so what happens is here that rather than paying the duty rate on the Chinese originating good immediately when the goods come into the UK, they're using inward processing, customs warehousing to delay that tax point. And the key thing here is, as you see on the picture, that not all of the goods are staying in the UK. For this company, 35% of the goods that come into the UK stay in the UK, 65% are re-exported. Not uncommon at all, especially if you have a company that are selling online to customers all over the world, including the EU. So what this company is accomplishing in savings is that on that 65% that is going out, they actually don't need to pay the duty. So it's an enormous customs duty saving they accomplish. And for the 35% of goods that stays in the UK, they have not a saving, but at least they have a cash flow advantage on that, because the duty becomes payable when the goods leave the warehouse and not when they come into the warehouse or into the country. So that's just an example. Now, this is a clothing company, but the same principle applies to companies that would bring in goods for manufacturing, say, for example, machinery, or you have companies that bring in goods wherever a portion of the goods will be re-exported, it always makes sense to consider customs warehousing or inward processing relief, depending on if you are storing or processing or both. So let's move on to the next slide, please. So we talked about duty savings, we talked about costs. Now, what are HMRC's expectations on you as importer? Louis mentioned a little bit, and I'm just adding a few pieces here. HMRC truly expects you as importer to check the declarations made in your name. So that's one thing that we see often does not happen. That check is really crucial. Obviously, to be able to do the checks, you will need to have the documents from your freight forwarder. So you need to have a copy of the declaration. You need to have a copy of any other kind of documents that the freight forwarder used as basis for that declaration. And you need to keep those documents. You need to keep them in a way that makes it easy to access them if HMRC is making a post-importation audits. HMRC also expect that you have written procedures for all of this. So how do you go about determining the right commodity code? How do you determine the right customs value and the right origin? So there should be written procedures. Now, in reality, what we see is, of course, that many companies don't have it written. There's someone who knows how to do it, and that person goes on their work. But HMRC's point of view is what if that person leaves the company tomorrow? Then all of a sudden, the company is at risk of being non-compliant. So HMRC sees that a risk to themselves and to the revenue that they collect. And finally, what we mentioned here on this slide, we talk about MSS data or CDS data. Now, when the freight forwarder submits the declaration to HMRC, that data can be retrieved. And that's what that last bullet point there is all about. You will have to subscribe to the CDS data to HMRC, and then you will get on a monthly basis a spreadsheet showing all the data that has been declared in your name. Now, that is, of course, in principle, the same as when you get the copies of the declarations from your freight forwarder. But there are advantages with getting the CDS data from HMRC. Above all, it's in a format that makes it easy to do checks. So that helps you to do these declaration checks. The only drawback, perhaps, with the CDS MSS data you get from HMRC is that it's not always easy to interpret what it says. Some of the information is plain text. You can see the name of the declarant, the name of the freight forwarder who made the declaration. But other data will be codes. So 300 or code 100, and it's not easy to know what that means. So if we go to the next slide, what we have on request of clients created is a tool that makes that information easy to interpret. So rather than getting a spreadsheet, you'll get access to screens like these that shows the data in a way that makes more sense and makes it easy for you to pick up on something that doesn't look quite right. It might be something that could represent a missed savings opportunity. Import, for example, you can see on the screen, it is very small, but on the screen it says, well, this company is importing goods from Germany, where some of the goods are originating in the EU, but not everything has been claimed preference for. So that's a potential duty saving. And as Louis said, you can go back, of course, if it turns out that you have been entitled to claim the preference and you haven't done it, you can go back in time. And the screens also show very clearly if there's something not quite right, a commodity code that you normally don't use, a customs value that seems unusually high or low, or indeed a country of origin that you don't really recognize. So it can be mistakes from the freight forwarder that haven't followed your instructions, or in worst case, they haven't gotten instructions at all from you and they're taking own initiative. And of course, that's not always going to turn out correctly. So that's it really. As I said, as a very, very brief tour covering many topics. But we wanted to make sure that we have time for questions. And as we said, we're always available for you to call us, email us, if anything of this that we've talked about today has raised any further questions that you may want to just talk privately with us about. So Dom, I'll hand over to you.
Thanks, Håkan. No, really good. A couple of questions have come in, so I'll just go through those now. So the first one is, what is a duty deferment account and do I need one? And I guess I could probably add to that of what are the benefits of having one, because I know you don't necessarily need one. So if I pass that question to you, Håkan.
Thank you. So Dom is right. You don't need a deferment account. It is a facility that HMRC offers for cash flow advantages, really. So in the old days, companies, importers use deferment account both for import VAT and customs duty. But since Brexit time, we have something called postponed VAT accounting, meaning that you don't actually need to pay the import VAT up front and then claim it back. So there's really no point in using deferment account for import VAT, but it is still absolutely something that makes sense for managing your customs duty liability. So what it is that rather than paying the customs duty immediately, you pay it on the 15th of the following calendar month in one lump sum. So it is a way to make sure that it's more practical and is a cash flow advantage. You don't need it, but it is a good idea, especially if you have a sizable customs duty liabilities. You could use someone else's, like a freight forwarder's deferment account, but of course, no surprise, they will charge you for it, and it's typically cheaper to have your own deferment account. Dom, I know you offer the services of setting up deferment accounts. Do you have anything to add to that?
I don't think so. I guess it's that cost benefit sort of analysis to do if you're going to import goods in very low volume. It may be easier, I guess, to avoid setting your own up. But in most cases, especially when volume increases, having that in the long term, it helps your cash flow, helps save fees on using somebody else's and what they will charge you to do that. So yeah, I'd agree with what you said.
It also helps oversight of the whole duty profile of the business as well, which is a sort of an intangible benefit.
Yeah, you're bringing everything in.
Bring everything in house.
Yeah, absolutely. Another question we've got is, can we use a customs warehouse for fulfilling internet sales?
Yeah. Do you want to take that, Louis?
Absolutely, yes. So the benefits of customs warehousing is that you delay the tax point for the sale. So for the purposes of sort of the benefit of the cash flow, you can then not pay any import VAT or customs duty until you physically sell the product to the end consumer. So it's a really good mechanism to improving the cash flow position, but whereby essentially delaying the tax point until you've actually sold the goods.
And if I can add to that, something I didn't mention on that slide, you often get this question, say, well, I don't know if this, the goods I import are going to stay in the UK or not. And that's fine. HMRC don't expect you to know that really. So what happens is you bring everything that comes in under duty suspension. And then when you get an order from, say, the US, you would release goods for that order from the customs warehouse, but everything else stays still in the customs warehouse. So yeah, is definitely something that you can use for internet orders as well as kind of traditional orders. You simply keep everything in the customs warehouse or under the inward processing relief until you've got a plan for what to do with it.
Right, thank you, guys. One question we have is, do we need to have a UK entity in order to use the duty relief that you talked about? So I guess that's referring to an earlier slide in the webinar.
Yeah. That's a good question. And yes, for most reliefs, you do need to be UK established. So for example, customs warehousing and inward processing, you must be UK established. So it's of course, being UK established from a customs point of view, it means that you need to have substance in the UK. You need to be on the company's house, or at least you need to be equivalently registered in the UK. But there are other advantages, of course, of being established in the UK. You have access to other easements, and if you have a UK customer base, they might feel more comfortable dealing with a UK established company rather than a foreign established company. So yeah, but the short answer to that question is yes. To have customs warehouse and inward processing, you do need to be UK established.
Perfect. Thank you. No, that's clear. Our final question we've got is, when bringing goods into the UK, who completes the paperwork and the customs declarations? I guess that's getting at.
So you typically need access to software to complete a customs declaration, but the key point there is that the trader or the URI number on the consignee box in the declaration is ultimately responsible for the contents of the declaration. So even though a customs agent will be completing the declaration, they have no liability for the contents of it, and that ultimately lies with the trader. So it's really key that you instruct the customs agent properly, and you're fully confident on everything they're declaring in your name.
And in practice, is the customs agent typically the same person as your freight forwarder, so the person actually moving the goods for you, or are they separate people?
Typically, it can be. Most freight forwarders, so to speak, have sort of customs declaration expertise and the means to do it. But there's also standalone customs agents that are out there and available, should you so desire.
Yeah, that's great. Okay, that's all our questions.
So maybe I can just add one thing on that last part there, because there's a link to the question before actually about establishment. If you're not established in the UK, that means that your agent who's making the declaration will take on a joint and several liability for the correctness of the declaration and for the payment of the customs duty. That can be very difficult to find a freight forwarder in the UK who's willing to take on that additional risk. In technical terms, it's called an indirect agent. So finding an indirect agent, someone who is taking a joint and several liability, can be difficult. So that could be another reason why you want to be established in the UK, because if you are established, then your freight forwarder does not need to take that additional risk, which they typically don't want. So yeah, then you end up with the scenario there that Louis described, that you have a freight forwarder / agent who is making the declaration, but they're not taking responsibility, and that's where they would want to be. So from a practical point of view, it can be very difficult to find an indirect agent, and that could force you to actually be established if you don't want your UK customer to take on the risk as importer. And again, from a commercial point of view, you typically don't really want to burden your customer with the responsibility of imports.
No, thank you. No, great. So timing is pretty perfect there. So thanks, Håkan. Thanks, Louis. We're on 10:30. So final comments from me is just to really echo Håkan's comments earlier. If anyone's got any questions after this about sort of a niche scenario or how that applies to your business, please get in touch with myself, Håkan, or Louis. Particularly around if you need a UK establishment as well. That's something that Goodwill have advised many clients in the past, and sort of what we do. So please do reach out. And just a reminder, this will be on our GoodHub on the website, and the slides and the recording will be distributed as well after the call. So thanks for joining, guys, and thanks, Håkan. Thanks, Louis.